So last time we looked at WrestleMania the arcade game for the Super Nintendo, which was essentially a terrible conversion of the WrestleMania arcade game, which was actually fairly decent for its time. We're gonna get that piece of crap out of the way and wake up the dog. We're gonna play us some Super WrestleMania for the Super Nintendo. I can already hear the groans from the audience right now. Here we go.
Super WrestleMania, which was released in 1991 by LJN, maker of toys. Again, I could hear the groans from the audience right now. And it featured 10 of the top WWF superstars of the time, such as Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Ted DiBiase, Jake the Snake Roberts, the Legion of Doom, and the Shockmaster, before he was the Shockmaster. Super WrestleMania boasts few game modes and match types to participate in. Aside from the obligatory singles match and tag team contests, you also have the traditional 4-on-4 Survivor Series style match, where the objective is to eliminate all opponents of the opposing team until your team's the only one surviving. While there's 3 different skill settings to tweak the difficulty of the enemy opponent computer-controlled computer things, there's no such championship mode or tournament mode of any kind to be found. So all the matches are basically exhibition matches that will last the one match and take you back to a screen that will either ask you to go for a rematch or go back to the title screen. It's a rather odd move not to include any tourney mode of any kind in order to give the game some play value. As it is, you'll probably play through the roster to try them out, play a few matches, and that's about it. As a multiplayer title, okay, fine, that's fine and dandy and all that. But a single player experience is definitely lacking in Super WrestleMania. Of course, that isn't the only thing lacking in Super WrestleMania. Although you have 10 WWF superstars to play with, there's not much difference between any of them, as they all have the same moveset. No unique attacks or signature moves to be found here. Everyone has the same set of suplexes, body slams, elbow drops, leg drops, and whatnots. While this may be perceived as a bit of a letdown and ultimately gives you little incentive to give the game any extended periods of play, one can at least take solace in the fact that there are actual wrestling moves in Super WrestleMania, which already makes it 10 steps above the initial NES offering from Rare that bared the name WrestleMania, and the less said about that travesty of a video game, the better. Control is fairly basic, primarily making use of all 4 face buttons for running, punching, kicking, and grappling. The grappling is a pretty straightforward affair. Whoever mashes buttons the fastest gets to pull off a move on their opponent, whether it be a headbutt, suplex, or scoop slam, depending on the button used. Given the rather slow pace of the gameplay, Control is actually fairly responsive for the most part, although there are slight occasions where nothing tends to happen when attempting a grapple. It's a rare case, however, and it doesn't completely destroy the game, if at all. For the most part, there's nice little details in the visuals of Super WrestleMania. The crowd is well detailed. You can notice the commentary team of Vince McMahon and Bobby Heenan in background, despite the game not possessing any commentary. The addition of ring introductions from famed ring announcer Howard Finkel is a particularly nice touch, and the wrestlers themselves actually have a presence about them that seems really larger than life despite only taking a portion of the playing field. And they look like what they're supposed to, I suppose. Animation is not one of the game's stronger points, as the wrestlers tend to have a staggered motion whenever they move about or perform moves. It's a bit jarring at first, but eventually you do get used to it, and it doesn't become too much of a bother. Outside of the main game, you have fairly high quality digitized pictures of the various wrestler mugshots, the title screen, and then teasing you all throughout the game's menus, the WWF Championship title belt blown up and darkened in the background of the menus. In terms of sound in Super WrestleMania, there's not much to it. Yes, you do have some generic sounding music in the introductions and the menu screens, and you have the individual wrestler theme musics that play at the end of a match or if you wait long enough on the character select screen, all of which are given respectable renditions on the Super NES hardware. But during the match, the only sounds you'll be treated to is ominous background noise that's supposed to be the audience, along with bland sounding grunts and impact sound effects, all of which have this weird echoey after sound that's kind of hard to describe, and I don't know if the video is properly translating that sort of thing. But, you know, on a whole, it's not so bad. It's not terrible. It's okay. The entrance themes are well done at least. WWF Super WrestleMania is not what I would call a good game. The pacing's a bit slow, the lack of a championship mode is baffling, and the lack of variations among the various wrestler moveset does kill the replay value on this thing rather quickly. On a side note, the game would eventually be released on the Sega Genesis, and that version while possessing fewer superstars and a vastly different roster selection, would have a championship mode where you could fight multiple superstars for the title, as well as signature moves for each superstar. But despite missing a few key components that severely cut down on the replay value of this thing, Super WrestleMania on the Super Nintendo did have some potential, and that potential would be realized in later games in the series such as Royal Rumble, Rage in the Cage, and eventually WWF Raw. On its own merits, Super WrestleMania is a game that is desperately lacking, but if you're willing to overlook its flaws and omissions just to play as Hulk Hogan, Sid, or the future Shockmaster, you'll probably enjoy this one, but not for very long. It's not a terrible game per se, it's certainly playable, and at the very least it's yards better than the abysmal WrestleMania on the NES, or the butchered conversion of the arcade game that would come later on. But it's a game that's outclassed by much superior sequels. It's certainly worth a look if you're into wrestling and can find a copy for real cheap, but don't expect it to hold your interest for too long. If anything, it'll serve more to hold you over until you can come across one of the sequels. But that's another story.
One, two.